start today's episode of the Fireside Chat, a little story. On January 24th, 2012, I had dinner in a restaurant called the MB Post in Manhattan Beach, California, with one of my oldest and best friends. It was an amazing experience. The food was great. The decor was great. It was just one of those experiences that imparted a memory. And I took the menu, as I often do in restaurants that I love, regardless of where I am around the world. Little did I know that 8.5 years later, I would be doing this episode with architect Stephen F. Jones. Amazing coincidence. He was the lead architect and designer of the space that I absolutely loved 8 years earlier. Also, all of his experience living in Colombia, traveling through Europe, and then becoming the in-house architect for the Wolfgang Puck Food Company. I hope you enjoys today's episode and learning the vision from Stephen F. Jones and everything he has done to help make restaurants and spaces part of our daily lives and part of what we live to celebrate. Enjoy. Really nice to meet you. I've been following your work for a while, and I'm excited about speaking with you.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you asked me. It's been kind of, working out of the house, as you know, has been quite lonely. So it's nice to be able to interact with other people.
I am sure. I have no doubt. It's tough. I read in a bit of my research before today, if I'm not mistaken, your wife is an urban planner. Is that right? Has an urban planning firm?
Yeah, she has her own firm. We actually met at UCLA grad school. I was in architecture, getting my master's, and she was getting her master's in urban planning. She has her own business called iStone Environmental, and she does a lot of really big projects, and she writes the environmental impact report and that whole thing. So she's quite busy, actually.
I have no doubt. Before getting into the urban bonfire world for almost 7 years, I worked in a specialty real estate consulting and development firm that worked exclusively on new urbanist mixed use projects around North America. So working with firms, I guess, like your wife's would have been pretty interesting.
No, she is. It's impressive, the projects that she's working on. It's like all the major ones in Hollywood and downtown, and she's in the pile of the big fish. And so, she sees a lot of that. So our scales are like completely opposite.
I imagine. So many things that I want to talk to you about today, from how you started to what you've done with your firm, the obvious focus in restaurant and hospitality, and just going through your website, projects that look really, really fun to be involved in. But before I do that, can we take a few minutes? And I would just love to hear a little bit about your story, where you grew up, family, education, your firm, just...
Okay, great. All right. So, I'm originally from Florida. My mother actually is from Colombia, South America, and immigrated when she was 22. And then, we grew up a large family, and I've always wanted to be an architect. I was always like the one, working with my dad, rebuilding our the engines, and I love the way how things went together. So, I went to University of Florida undergraduate school and got a degree in architecture there. And then I decided that I wanted to get my master's, because to be able to practice, you needed that degree. And so I decided that if I was going to work on real architecture, I needed to be somewhere other than Florida. So I decided to move to Boston. And I figured, I wanted to go to Harvard. That was my dream. So I figured if I went to Boston, at least I was like, a little bit closer there. So I worked for a big firm called Jung Brannon, and we worked on high rises. It's funny when I equate what I'm doing now to the beginning of my career. I was working on high rises, working on all the public spaces. That was the team that I was on. And so that was always the fun stuff, And so I spent figured out a way to kind of get doing that. A lot of it was because I did a lot of renderings, so hand renderings and presentations. And, I always found that the person who does a presentation is the last guy who gets a word on what the design is going to be, because they're doing the actual drawing that's going to be. So I always kind of felt that was really part of my ambition to want to be the creative guy,
And out of curiosity, was your love for, and I read again in doing my research, your love of, I believe, crew and sculling, was that prior to moving to Boston, which is notoriously known for, or was that a result of being in Boston?
Yeah, it actually originated in Boston. I rode on the Charles River out of the BU Boathouse, a club team. It wasn't part of the university, but it was part of the thing. I'd get up early in the morning, ride my bike on the Esplanade down to the BU Boathouse on the other side of the river. And, something about waking up in the morning and seeing the skyline of Boston with, the shining dome of the state capitol and the sun rising up above it was just so inspiring. It's just and it's it was, really got me into a place where, you see the sun rippling off the water, and it's almost magical, and you can put yourself in a trance. And I have since, been making that part of my morning routine. When I came out to LA, I went to UCLA. Well, I decided to apply to UCLA and Harvard and a couple other schools. So needless to say, I didn't get into Harvard, but I did get into UCLA. So I came out here, and then when I was going through school, I realized they had a program, and so I started rowing out of the boathouse, during grad school, and it's been something that I've been, I'm on my 25th year of rowing every morning in the boathouse, and it's really part of my whole how I start my day. Of course, COVID has kind of really messed things up. So I haven't been able to go on the water because it's part of the boathouse is part of UCLA and all the campus stuff. But coming out to California was my ultimate dream. Even though I wanted to be in Boston, I loved Boston. It was such a great experience. And when I came out here, I decided that I would take a year off, and I realized I'd get my state, residency and get cheaper tuition if I was here for a year. So I worked for a firm called RTKL, who they do a lot of big retail spaces, and with my experience on working on high rises, they were doing some high rises in Chinatown, and but then I kind of got disillusioned by the whole large scale architecture projects. The one I did in Boston, I worked on for 2.5 years, and when I left, they were just starting construction. So I never really got to see it being, I'd make some trips going back, but I never really got to see it, come to life in front of me. And the same with RTKL, we were doing very large retail buildings, and we'd move on to the next project, and do the design and someone else. So I had friends of mine who were architects here in LA, and this is, this is the late 80s, and the restaurant industry was really starting to grow, and somebody convinced me to go work for a boutique firm called Grinstein Daniels, and they did a lot of restaurants, really hip, cool restaurants. And of course, I'm in my late 20s, and nothing better than to be associated with the new openings of restaurants. And sure. And the other thing too, it had a much quicker turnover. So it was a year, maybe a year and a half from the conception to opening day, and there was so you got to see things, and you got to work more hand in hand with artisans and fabricators, and that whole kind of figuring things out kind of goes back to my roots of putting engines back together with my dad. Right. That you figure out how to do that, and that has been my really big. I do this. I always say I'm so fortunate that I do what I love, that this is what I would do if I was retired, it's like just to be able to keep thinking forward. And so when I was moving along, the recession hit, and I finished off my last year at UCLA, and it was really bad in 1992. There's no work here at all. A friend of mine that was my roommate in college called me up, and he was in Florida, and said, "Hey," he was a contract. He was in business. Construction administration, and got his license and contract. And he's like, you got to come out to Florida. Hurricane Andrew just came through, and there's so much work that he had, and I need your help. So, within a couple of weeks, I packed up, subleased my project. My now wife was my girlfriend at the time, and we both finished college, and so I went to do that, and we rebuilt homes after Hurricane Andrew, which was another kind of learning experience about, what architecture is, and how, what the role is of an architect to the builders. You're supposed to give instructions of how to do things. And when you're in a position where you're, being sent to Home Depot to pick up some doors, and you don't know if they're left swing or right swing doors because you don't have a plan, because it wasn't on the plans. Those are things that, that are crucial for the builders to know, and what the job is of the architect to be able to, fully do. So that kind of deeper understanding of how you communicate design ideas and put it on drawings to the workers really was a good sense of realization. Before that, and while I was in college, I actually, when I was at UCLA, I decided that I wanted to travel abroad, and I wanted to. There was a program through the University of Washington that was studying Italian hill towns, and I felt, and so this friend of mine who attended the course over the summer. Came back with photos, and it was just amazing. It was just like, he was living in this little Italian hill town between Florence and Rome, and in a little city called Civita di Bagnoregio. And so I was so intrigued by that. I'm like, well, I want to do that program. So between my first and second year of grad school, I applied to the program, and I got accepted. And I went out at the beginning of the summer. Before I left, I started thinking, I kind of did the math, and I realized that the program's over, and I had a week to get back to LA to finish up my classes. And then I'm like, what a shame. I'm going to be all the way over there. I don't even get to visit anywhere other than my classes and come over. And so then I said, I'm going to try to stay longer, and I'm going to try to get a job and stay there. So I speak Spanish fluently. So I figured, well, Spain would be where I should be going. And it happened to be, I worked for my boss at the time, had connections with Ricardo Bofill. He used to work for Ricardo Bofill in Barcelona, and was good friends with one of the principals. So I faxed over samples of my renderings, and literally got a job over the fax machine. They got all my paperwork ready and everything. And so I went to Barcelona. I went to Italy. I did the program over the summer. Just the most amazing experience. And then after that, I traveled a month before, they closed down August, so I traveled a month around Europe with my sketchbook and my watercolor paintings. And I did all of these, I have this amazing sketchbook that I did of all my travels, and kind of a logging of that. And then I ended up in Barcelona, and then I worked there that whole year. This is 1992. So this is right before the Olympics.
Right.
And so this Barcelona was just like coming alive, and it was just amazing. I mean, after years of, Franco and a whole generation people that are growing up, not under a Franco dictatorship. The creativity was just amazing, and the restaurants that were opening up. I mean, it was really eye-opening. I wasn't expecting that to be also at the forefronts of the new stadiums, and I was working on some of the stuff for Barcelona. It was just like really exciting time, kind of like my Boston time, where it was kind of like that.
And surrounded by Gaudi and architecture, I mean, Barcelona, I mean, there's nothing, it's like Disneyland if you look at architecture and design. I mean, even if you don't understand architecture, principles, history, visionaries, to be in Barcelona, you can't help but absorb it. It's so interwoven into every aspect of it as a city.
It is. It was an amazing experience. And so then I had to go back to finish my last year. Of course, the people at Beaufield were like, "Oh, you're crazy. You have it so good here," because I did have it really good. And then I said, "Well, no, I want to finish, and I'll be right back." So then I left. Before I left, I actually traveled 2 months, and I did a really big loop around Spain, all the way down to Turkey, and what was Yugoslavia, and up to the Baltics, and then I just continued sketching, and I over 150 watercolor paintings that I did. I would just go to like somewhere, like I remember being in Paris and standing there, and I had my little fanny pack that I have my paints in, and my water bottle, and my and my brushes, and bring out my watercolor block, put on my headphones, and just kind of get into another world. And before I know it, I'm looking around, and there's like a crowd of people watching me paint, and I was like, wow, I've become from being, a tourist to be part of the attraction, and it was kind of, it was a really fun way to experience another country. And each one of those paintings just have so much meaning to me, because I can imagine when I was painting them, the mood I was in, the people I was around, the weather, what I was looking at, studying the details of the Pompidou, or whatever the subject matter was. But then so I came back, and then I finished my last year, and that's when I met my wife, Stephanie, and then after that, that's whenever I graduated. I called up my contacts in Barcelona. The Olympics had just gone by. The economy was folding in Spain. They were laying people off. I didn't have enough money to get back anyway, and I was dating Stephanie, so kind of things change, and you just like when I was in Boston, I thought I was going to be going to Harvard. I was kind of like a premeditated kind of scenario, but then something completely different happens. So the same thing happened. Something different happens. Opportunities raise themselves. Going to Miami, although it was, going from one extreme to another. I was, living the high life in Barcelona, and then the next year I'm living in a house that we're remodeling in the front end with 12 other construction guys, and the National Guard making sure that nobody's going around looting or anything. So it was quite a contrast, and some times where I was the only one there, and just kind of like, oh my God, what am I doing here? But I came back to LA. And then got a job working, doing a cogeneration plant, actually, for an architectural firm. But I got, when I came back, one of the people I used to work with, the person who brought me into this boutique firm, contacted me again and said, I'm working for Wolfgang Puck. And we're and they are growing the company, and they want to expand a new fast, mid-level restaurant chain called Wolfgang Puck Cafe. And, why don't you come work for us? So I was like, at the time I'm thinking, well, I'm an architect. I'm not going to work for a restaurant company. I wanted to work for a big prestigious architectural firm, but my wife was working on a big project in Playa Vista, and she wanted to finish it up. So I decided to take the job as kind of like a filler job. So I was amongst 3 other people that started the architecture department at the Wolfgang Puck Cafes doing the new concept rollout. But so as I was working with them, I started kind of realizing more of, potential of reaching my dream, which was to have my own business. And I had really gained the respect of both Wolfgang and his wife at the time, Barbara Lazaroff, and I felt that this could be a way for me to be able to start my own business, and maybe I could do some of the overflow work that they couldn't handle in house or something like this. And then in '95. Wolfgang and Barbara decided to close down Spago on Sunset and move it to a new location in Beverly Hills on Cannon. And so they wanted me to do the restaurant, but technically I was an employee of the food companies, and the restaurant was a group of private investors. So I wasn't technically supposed to be working on that project. So I quit and I started my business. And it was even before I actually got the commission, but I had a good, feeling I was going to get it. So I got Spago in Beverly Hills as my first commission as SFJones Architects.
What a first one!
Yeah.
I want to come back to something really interesting. You've mentioned and you've interwoven through your story a lot about travel and how that has really impacted you. And it got me to think very much the same for me, and how when we're young and we're experiencing the world, travel we may not be able to connect the dots moving forward, that this trip to Italy and then to Barcelona and into Paris, for example, and other places, how they are going to impact us down the road. But we're taking on, even in our conscious or in many ways, I think in our subconscious, we're taking on experiences that will inform decisions, design, things that we will be inspired by later on. Yeah. So one of the things I want to ask you about is, first of all, I want to hear a little bit about your time in Bogota, which I understand is an incredibly European-styled city. And the other thing, because you mentioned Paris specifically, I was interested to know, have you visited Montreal in any of your travel at this point? And if you have, I would, which is an architecturally exquisite city. Yeah. I'd love to hear about travel for you.
Yeah, I mean, travel definitely it forms the basis of a lot of what you think. I constantly go back to my memory, my library of memories of spaces and how I felt in it, and when you draw, when you do a sketchbook, you're always looking at proportions. You have to figure out, this is this wide by this high, and that kind of like forms, the space. And so you have, I think there's a lot of experience, a lot of that just by visiting and drawing it, that you really are able to carry through in your work and do that. I haven't been to Montreal. It's one of the places I really would like to go. I've been to Toronto, it's on the list. I've been, when I lived in Colombia, it was when I was young. When I was like, I think it's 12 years old, and my mother and my aunt, she had a child that had a heart problem and had to live in lower elevation, and Bogota is up in the mountains. So we switched kids for a year. And so I went to Colombia, lived with my aunt and uncle and my cousins, and went to a school over there, which, when you're 12 years old and all of a sudden you're not only not with your parents, but in another culture, in another school where everything is completely, new and different. And Bogota was such a, a metropolitan place. Back then, even now, I've been back, I go back a few times and visit I have a lot of family over there. And then, what they're doing with the transportation system and their whole like as you mentioned, kind of more of a European kind of a sense of culture, is just really, it's really intriguing. And it's really, I'm so proud to have that as part of my heritage, that I feel like I can, there's one more dimension into who I am, in terms of that.
You mentioned that. It's interesting. I don't know if you know the name Ray Gindros, if that name rings a bell, one of the pioneers in new urbanist philosophy planning. And I think very much like you, love to sketch and draw in places that were meaningful to him. And I remember, we're going back about more than 10 years now, when I was involved in new urbanist real estate, we would have these really interesting conferences here in Montreal, because Montreal is a modern city, but still has, like others, a very old part of it. Like old Montreal is a district that is still cobblestone, that is still original infrastructure to the late 1700s. I mean, to give you a sense of how old the infrastructure is, about 10 years ago, they replaced the water mains, and the massive water mains were still wood. If you goes back how old these things are. And he would sit, and one of the guests, and he would sit quietly and he would sketch. And one of the things that he pointed out to me, which I found interesting, is he said, look at the difference between classic French or Parisian European architecture. Look at this street. You can't see the end. It is intentionally designed with curve, so it does not have a limiting view. It doesn't have a start and an end to the person exploring it, versus more British or traditional Toronto, New York, more linear sort of streets and avenues that are very straight.
Yeah.
And it is remarkable to me, as a non-architect, non-traditionally educated in anything to do with this area of specialty, how that micro nuance has changed the way I look at streets when I travel for the rest of my life.
Yeah, no, you know what? It's an element of, of surprise or not knowing what you're going to, like, there was an example of like how you would situate a house on a lake. If you had any place on the lake that you can put it on, if you put it on the position where you can see the full lake, that wouldn't be as desirable if you put it on the way where there was a little part of the lake that you didn't see, and you can just imagine it just goes on forever, but that, those kind of little subtleties can be taken into big scales, like position on a lake, but also on smaller scales. When I design my restaurants, I always think about how to create not just a theme, a design, but how do I create little other spaces within spaces that you could have like different experience in, And I would say that if you went to like one of my restaurants and you were able to go there 2 or 3 times and have a different experience each time you went there, just where you got sat inside of the space, then I think about those kind of things, the same to your analogy of the street that turns a corner that you don't know what's on the other side, because you kind of you get to explore it and you get to, so yeah, I really.
Well, and that is an excellent segue into what I want to talk to you about, Rest, which is a focus on your restaurants. And I want to say first that I can't think of a project typology where design is more critical in the overall experience than in restaurant. And I acknowledge the brilliance of architecture and design that goes into office buildings and goes into other types of projects, but there is something that is so innately critical in food and beverage, and as it relates to the guest experience. And I want to share with you an anecdote or a story that I think is going to be really interesting. Mm-hmm. I grew up with, if you asked me when I was 6 or 7 years old, I would have told you I want to own a restaurant. I just love the idea of the whole experience. And I ended up being involved in restaurants sort of down the road in part of my entrepreneurial history and life. But one thing I've always done from when I started traveling at 17 through the Middle East, then living in Africa, through Europe, I've traveled extensively. And whenever I am moved in an experience of a restaurant, I take note of it. Back in the day when smoking was allowed, we would get matchbooks that had the logo or a menu, or before we had iPhones and we're snapping pictures of everything. And over the years, I've collected, I don't know, let's call it 30 or 40 menus of places where I had an experience that was just all encompassingly awesome, from aesthetic to how I felt, to noticing chair, to lighting, to the food. And I take the menu with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a menu out of a restaurant on January 24th, 2012.
Mm-hmm. And be post.
Now, what an incredible segue into my research before today's conversation to find out that this is what an incredible story to have, that this experience that I had with one of my oldest and best friends in the world, who happens to live in Manhattan Beach and took me there, but that it resonated enough that I took this 8 years ago before meeting you today, and you designed this. So what a segue into the conversation on restaurant.
Well, I tell you, an MB Post is kind of like, one of the things as an architect that your dream is to design and build your own house, right? And you're sitting in my house that I designed and built, and that's such a great thing. Your next favorite thing to do would be to design a restaurant in your own community, and I was afforded the opportunity to be able to do that with a great group of restaurateurs, Mike and Chris Sims and chef David LeFevre, who were just like, we're really a great group of people. And, most of my good projects come from that, that just a visionary owner who wants to take it to the next level. And on MB Post, they basically said, look, we want this to feel like your hometown. We really want people to be comfortable. Well, first of all, it was in the old post office in downtown Manhattan Beach that had since been moved to another location, but it had been a number of restaurants in a few times. And I started thinking, wow, what a great, the most social place in a city used to be the post office. Everybody went there to pick up your mail, and that's where you get. So it was
always right in the center of town. It was the central gathering place for a community.
Right, and so I started thinking. So when we were coming up for a name for the place, we kind of the post office, and then MB Post and Manhattan Beach Post, and so that's where the name kind of came from. Post. Being the post office. And then I started thinking about, I live in Manhattan Beach. So, what do people do in Manhattan Beach? Well, one of the things we do a lot of is play volleyball. We go to the beach all the time, and the volleyball posts along the coast, people play in the same spots all the time. They paint the poles to kind of give it some personality. And so if you are a local and you ride your bike up and down the Strand, you could recognize some of these posts. So the initial concept was to be able to kind of recreate some of the environment into the space. The other thing that there's a lot of is lifeguard stands. And on the lifeguard stands, they have painted on a blue stands the number of the street that it's on. So if it's on 4th Street, it's a 4 with a TH, or it's on Rosecrans, it's abbreviated the same way. Anyway, so one day, my daughter and we started from one end of the Strand all the way down, and we took pictures of all the lifeguard stands and all the volleyball posts. And then, so when we did the design, I wanted to have this aesthetic of, like, it's been there a long time. I was kind of reimagining what the post office might have been like, although I didn't have any pictures or anything. And then so I used reclaimed wood, which in 2011 was not very, was very innovative. Now it's like, pretty much everywhere. But then within the wood post, within the wood cladding using the reclaimed wood, I would have boards that I had an artist paint with the exact same marking that was on the Lifeguard stand in the same kind of, like, if it was, faded, in portion. So it looked like exactly the same number. So that if you were a local and you went to the beach and you would recognize that subliminally, you would say, this is tied in with the community. In the bar, I used all of these. I had an artist replicate the poles from the volleyball courts, and then had those kind of also mixed. I even took one of the posts from the beach and actually planted it in there. But that's another level of detail and of meaning that most people don't know until I point out to them. When they and but Manhattan MB Post really had it was really about we had the communal tables that we lit in a certain way so that it really spotlighted the food, and we had a center portion of the piece that was raised up so the food would be easier for people to share with and presented in a nice. So all these little details just go into the creation of these restaurant spaces. And the restaurants, they are. I kind of equate them to what it must be like to design a Ferrari or a sports car, and the fact that you have to have a really big engine, that is top performing. The kitchen is a big engine in it, and it fits in a sexy body, that looks like this, and it has to go 125 miles an hour all the time, So it's just, it's that kind of, it's a machine almost, but has two aspects of it. It has the mechanic aspect of it, and it has the customer feels and the ambiance and what I just mentioned to you about creating the connection with the community. And so, I've always been, since my early days, intrigued with restaurants just because they have their own kind of built-in publicity. I mean, I'm able to tell my people when they ask me what I do, and I was like, oh, well, you've been to Spago or Lucky Strikes or, a lot of these things. I said, well, that's what I do. So it has this kind of a built-in aspect to it that, maybe residential work, you probably never see it after you finish building it because it's somebody's private home. But to be able to do MB Post in my own backyard, and to be able to have people recognize it and to be able to go there and we always have my kids' birthdays, and so it's pretty cool.
Well, I'd like to ask you now, it's sort of, again, it segues into something I've been very interested to ask you about. What we are living and our company as Urban Bonfire works almost not entirely in residential. We do a little bit of commercial, but it's 98% residential. And what we are heavily involved in is the inspiration of fusing together the relationship between indoor and outdoor. Right. And having worked with both, visionary restaurateurs who are starting with a one location all the way up to, things where there's, as you said earlier, outside investment, whether it's Wolfgang Puck and Spago, Lucky Strike Lanes. I mean, these are large corporations. I wanted to ask you, through your practice, and have you seen a change in the way that restaurateurs envision and think about their outdoor space? If you look at many restaurants, and California is one of the greatest examples due to weather and other factors where you can really merge the indoor and outdoor sort of brilliantly. It seems often that the amount of time and energy and focus and investment that goes into the outdoors is completely into the indoors makes total sense. And the outdoors is often leftover space, a few heaters, some tables, misaligned. Right. I'd love to hear from you in your experience designing restaurants. Has it always been an important factor? Is it changing? Are the requests from the restaurant owners changing as it relates to outdoor space design and trying to create more identity and more alignment between the two. How does that play into your current process and practice?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm getting a ton of thoughts just thinking about just while you're asking me the question and things that. And I tell you that it's always the outdoors has always been the bonus space. You basically you design a restaurant so that your interior seats is going to be what you need to make money. If you can get outside space and the landlord is going to be able to let you have it for free or something like that, that's just a bonus. That's a plus. And so there's always been that that kind of feeling from an owner's side to let's take advantage of the patio when we can, and let's design it so that we can. There's one big drawback that we have, and that is the health code laws in California, and so they're very strict about being able to separate out where the food preparation is from the outside. So that kind of line between inside and outside, when you have a set of doors that open to the outside, they have to be on closers so that it always closes up. So a lot of times what we want to do, and one of my clients, Simsies, that the whole concept was the whole thing open to the outside into a patio that looked out to the ocean and had this whole connection. So what you have to do is then you have to separate the kitchen from the dining space, and a lot of times that's contradictory to what a chef wants to do. They want to be on show, they want to be, seeing everything like this. They don't want a piece of glass in front of them, but the codes kind of are written so that you have to do it. So there's always that kind of, how do you make that balance, and how do you design so that you can meet health department codes and have things open up. Although I believe with what's happening now with the alfresco seating and everybody kind of seeing how nice that is to happen, that possibly cities are going to start to think more in terms of maybe we don't need parking spaces every single place over here. Maybe some outside seating and can really add life to the city, and that's much more valuable than 3 parking spots. And then maybe the health departments are going to be a little, start thinking a little bit more about, there's other ways to be able to mitigate their, what they call the fly rule, which a fly can't fly into other parts of the space, or just ease up a little bit on it. I mean, people have been cooking that way for throughout mankind, and so why is it that we are at a point where it's so restrictive that becomes?
If you look at cities, and as you mentioned, Tuscany, Barcelona, these are the vast majority of the activation of the space where people truly enjoy restaurants is often outdoors, whether it's courtyard, patio, back. There seems to be a little bit, and Montreal as well. Well, a little bit less stringent on the restrictions and health codes and that type of thing. A little bit more in favor of the romantic nature of we eat outside. Yeah, we might get a fly but the overall experience of what it does, it's trumps, you know what I mean?
Exactly, right? I mean, that's where it's, you just have to get, you have to work through some cultural things. And, I always say that the building department, and whenever you get your permits and everything, everybody's basically trying to cover their butts, and making sure that, this is what it says on the law. This is how I have to interpret it and how I have to enforce it. Yep. And they don't think past that. They don't think about what they're destroying by, doing that. But one of the things I have been noticing, and in fact, I have had a few projects that I'm really excited about. And I've really, I think in the past 5 years, I've really turned the page on the type of work that I do, based on this kind of this concept that I've been working on. I call it my Saturday concept. And Saturday, I was asked to do a project in South San Francisco, and it was amenities facilities for a biotech office park in South San Francisco. And it's called an area called Oyster Point, where there's no restaurants around, and they wanted to be able to create a campus-like environment for the 7 towers. It was 1 million square foot of biotech, so they all had labs and everything. And so they gave me the ground floor of one of the footprints of one of the buildings in the middle. And they said, we want to create an amenity space for this park. And they kind of equated it for it to be what, Google does for their employees, that we want to provide that kind of environment and we want to provide that extra. And so, I always have a story whenever I do my projects, the story I was telling you about MB Post, about how the things come together. And when I first started working on this, I was baffled and I was like, what's my story? So then I started thinking about, I was reading the LA Times. They had the Saturday section where they have all of the things like food and mind and body and exercise and travel and all these kind of things combined in one section of the newspaper. And I was like, that's it, Saturday, Saturday is the best day of the week. Saturday is the day that you take time off to do what you need to do, to go exercise, to do your laundry, to do this. And so I kind of came up with this idea of equating Saturday, what Saturday is to the rest of the week, this amenity space is to this whole office park. And so what is it that, why do people like to go to work at a place where, they have those kind of amenities? Well, they don't have to leave at 5 o'clock to go take their dry cleaning in to get dropped off. And then, we have dry cleaning pickup there. We have, on Wednesdays, the dentist would come and we had a little kiosk for them. We had an outside seating, outside area where, in this particular project, it tied in with the rest of the San Francisco Bay and a jogging trail that went across here. So we basically had that kind of connected to our space. The space and it had a main dining area. A main dining area that was very flexible, so that it could host different types of functions. And then it also had on one side it had a cafe, had a gym, even had a bowling alley in it. But, wow. But it was basically, so nobody in the area really did kind of understand, what the amenities was until they opened up. And this was phase one that this opened up. As soon as it opened up, they sold out, and they immediately decided to do phase 2 and phase 3 because of what it was going. But what the point of this is just that, this kind of sense of community that had been kind of getting lost whenever people, started working at home and feeling isolated, that they were, not part of the community, that, this whole thing started to evolve. At the same time, I did some projects in Kenya, and I would travel through Amsterdam on my way over there, and I ran across a place in Amsterdam called Spaces, and this is like WeWorks, but one of the first WeWorks, before WeWorks became blown up. And I was just so intrigued. I was like, wow, this is it. This is the same thing. It's amenities for people, and it's a different way that people, want to live and want to work. And the whole concept of WeWorks is all based on that kind of, getting out of your living room and being part of a community. And so a lot of that is like shared spaces that you have to have. And in like WeWorks, the shared spaces are, places to eat, dining halls, and within a building. But the same thing can happen with outside spaces, and outside spaces can create those kind of little, just like Montreal, have these parts, they're just gems of spaces within an urban fabric. And so I started thinking that this could actually, these amenity spaces works great for office spaces. And I was asked by a developer in California called CenterCal, and they were doing a development, a retail development. And so the retail industry, it's also going through a big transformation. The big boxes are closing down. These big developers are kind of wondering how am I going to draw people to my community? What's replacing that? And the other tenants in there are going to their landlords and saying, hey, you got to do something, So I was asked to create an amenity space for a big office park. not office park, a retail center. So it was your typical, big parking lot in the middle, surrounded by big boxes, movie theater with the 5,000 square foot restaurants. But in the corner was our amenity space, which consisted of 6 tiny restaurants. So, so I've been thinking about this idea of tiny restaurants, of how to make it smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point that the restaurant is really only the kitchen. It's only like the engine, right? And the engine, imagine all these little kitchens serving a public space. That's all of the seating is communal. So, so the restaurateurs basically have their small footprint, and people go and buy, and then they go and sit in a nice environment. We spent a lot of money with this fountain, and we have this big lawn that in the wintertime is an ice skating rink. In the summertime, it's concerts on the lawn and playgrounds, and so it's like all of these amenities.
Like the classic European food hall experience, where it's, and we saw, it's so funny you mentioned this, because Montreal, the average size of restaurant in Montreal, again, being very European, is just sub 40 seats. Very different in terms of scale than most major US cities. Right. And we've seen this influx of these food hall concepts where these are not food courts with chains and franchises and that sort of, McDonald's, KFC. It's really best of best restaurateurs creating specialized micro concepts and bringing this whole, elevating the entire gastronomical experience in that community way.
Yeah, and the thing that was so exciting about this project that I was talking to you about is that they focused on the people that there were going to be in these 6 units as being, local people. I mean, because, the restaurants, you pretty much the restaurants so expensive to build, unless you're a well-funded business, they're not for the faint of heart, But these 6 restaurants, we wanted to make sure that we got local mom and pops in there. We got people who've been in food trucks, has never been in a brick and mortar before. And my job was to basically be able to help these people who've never, first of all, never done a restaurant, but never done a restaurant in such tiny space. So I had to, put together this, little engine of all the components that the health department needs. You need to have your 3-compartment sink and all those things to be legal, but then make it in such that so that they, it opens up to outside spaces. We did, one of the spaces was a wine bar that was literally a big long bar, and all opened up to outside seating. And then there was a coffee shop, and then a poke bar, and then a Korean grill. And
if you can keep them small, and you can, design in shared back of house, which is often a huge amount of the cost, you don't have to do that times 6, and shared dining. I mean, that is the way to, I think, on an economics level, make it something that's viable for the restaurateur.
Yeah, and so the other key thing was the way it was, and I thought this was very clever of the way that the developer went about this. And they paid for the build out of all of these units, right?
Wow.
So they structured their deal with them differently than a regular restaurateur that, you pay rent of this. It was basically, they were partners into this thing. So the developers paid for the build out, they paid for my fee, they paid for all the outside seating. The restaurateurs only was responsible for the kitchen equipment and any furniture, anything you can plug in or take out with it. So then their point of entry, instead of being 2.5 million, it was more like 250,000, and it was much more of a bite size. And then that afforded the local mom and pops to be able to be in that. And then, amongst the other restaurateurs, you had to basically, you're signing into this thing, you need to perform, and so, and they would do is put these people on shorter leases, so that, if there was one of the entities that wasn't performing like the rest of them, because you fed off of everybody performing, then that person can leave and be replaced by someone who did. So then all of a sudden the culture of being amongst this group of 6 restaurants became such that, people wanted to be in that little tight
Well,
there.
it goes from the traditional real estate model of get a broker and chase, who can who can I get to sign a lease, versus make it more of almost a casting and audition process where each one of those specialty restaurateurs needs to come in and really own it and create their so the whole thing elevates. It makes total sense.
So I see, I see that as kind of, the trends that's going this way, and the restaurant business, and this whole COVID thing is really going to shake out a lot of stuff. I mean, I think that the industry has been, oversaturated for many years, and it's the same group of people chasing the same dollar, and unfortunately, the strong survive, but there's also opportunity that happens because of it. And so just the same kind of idea of the community of 6 restaurants that they all have to perform to make it better. I think it's a shakeup that's going to make that happen. And then I think too that people are going to be having different feelings about how they experience a restaurant, being more outside, more communal, more like, the amenity space that I was talking to, the examples that I'm talking to you about. And then, and how that is transforming the restaurant industry and society in general. I mean, we're realizing how much COVID has affected the restaurants and how much of a cultural blow that is to all of us, that is, we can't interact with our friends. I'm sure in Montreal, you must be getting pretty cold now. So, we're fortunate enough to still be able to eat outside here. But, these periods of people having to, still make it work. I'm really worried about the immediate future of restaurants. But I'm very excited about the prospects of what might come out of the other end of this. I think that I'm very much of an optimist, thinking that there's a reason for everything. And just because you're put under certain kind of circumstances that you believe that it's, how in the world can this be happening? Why, when I didn't get into Harvard, and I was like, that was the end of the world for me. But, all these other opportunities came up, and it became much better than I could ever imagine that it would be,
Yeah.
So I think that, that there's a lot to be gained. There's a lot of people's attitudes, I think, that are going to change. I mean, the fact that we're doing this Zoom call here. I mean, I've been doing Zoom, go-to meetings and these kind of calls for years. But, now everybody has got exposed to it, from the, 5-year-old in kindergarten class to this, and it's going to be a new norm, that we're going to be used to doing. I've been working out of my house, and I have my office that I had just moved in literally 2 weeks before the shutdown.
Wow.
I haven't even been able to go in there because of COVID, and I don't really, my whole staff, we're all working remotely and kind of seamlessly still able to do what we have. And I go back to my office and I'm like thinking, what do I have this office for? I just go in there to water the plants and to check the mail. I turned off my internet because there's nobody there, and might as well not spend that amount of money doing that.
I hear you. We've got a 4,000 square foot beautiful showroom, and today I'm the only person here. Our entire team is working remotely, and you're right. It's absolutely the new normal. That's just the way I think we're going to evolve. But I do think one of the things you mentioned a few minutes ago, which is that I think that, well, you're right. I think restaurants, like so many other businesses, are going to feel a real short-term hurt, and sadly some won't survive this. I also believe that the restaurant experience and what it means to people on a local community level, in the way you described it, I think is so fundamentally important to the way we socialize and what we do. And it's one of the few things that cannot be replaced with technology or Amazon, or it's innate. It is something that is just woven into us. So I think it's going to come back, and I think it's going to come back strong with new and interesting concepts like the ones that you are describing, these food hall specialty, local mom and pop. I just think we are trending towards that style of authentic experience seeking on eating, on everything. I think we're poised for that as a society.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's something to be, feel good about, I
agree.
I think, you take it, sometimes it takes a major jolt, like that to happen. Otherwise we would all continue going on the same path and the variety of life would be a little bit different. Right?
When things reopen and we're able to travel again, California is at the very top of my list, not only for work, but also to see my dear friend. I would love to get together with you when I come. I don't know if we can break bread, but what I would love to do is maybe break bacon cheddar buttermilk biscuits at the MB Post, which was, if you remember, from 2012, still something that I remembered. So maybe we could meet up and share that experience. I'd love to get a tour from you and how you envisioned it and brought all those elements that hit me as a simple Wednesday night diner 8 years ago, so much so that I saved the menu and remembered it.
Oh, that's cool. That's very cool. That's very cool. Well, and the same thing. Now I have one more reason to go to Montreal. I would really
from what you have described, I think you would absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Just love it. If that's ever on your plans, please, I would be so honored to, spend a few hours with you and show you a few of the things that I've learned living in this city.
That sounds wonderful.
I want to thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. I've enjoyed following your work, and thank you. I think that our society and the need for people to think of restaurants and not just that they serve meals, but what they do for people's lives and how they connect and communicate. So important, the work that you do. Even if the diner can't articulate why, the overall experience is so amazingly informed by the overall design and flow and aesthetic of the place that they're in. So thank you for the work that you do.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm glad to hear that you appreciate it and that you're able to understand lots of my work.
I wish you, your wife, your family continued health and safety and success, and I look forward to our next discussion, whether that's in Montreal, California, or by Zoom.
Sounds great.
Talk about coincidence. Who would have thought that a restaurant that I grabbed the menu in 8 years ago would finally come out of my file and be part of a conversation with a famous architect? This is what I love about the Fireside Chat. It's talking to real designers, real architects, and real people about their work and how their work impacts our lives. Me as a perfect example. I hope you enjoyed today's episode with architect Stephen F. Jones, hearing about his impact on restaurants and how he feels that restaurants and food are still one of the great connectors of people in our world. Thanks for joining us today. Please follow us on your podcast platform. Join our discussion on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Urban Bonfire. We want to hear from you, your thoughts, your questions. Please feel free to write in, call in anytime. We want to hear from you. Until next time, thank you very much for listening.